about it later. Okay, so we are going to speak today about this week's double portion, which is the portion of Acharei Mot and Kedoshim. But first, I want to talk about this concept of double parsha. Okay, so last week and this week, Jewish communities around the world read two parshiot together. So the Jewish annual, there's 54 parshas that cover the five books of Moses. And so you can already see that there's an issue, right? Because there's only 52 weeks and there's 54 parshas. That's one issue. So sometimes two portions are combined to fit the calendar so that we make sure that we read all of them in one year. This year is a non-leap year. Okay. So during a non-leap year, there's four times where two weekly Torah portions are read together in the same week. And it occurs, number one, because I already told you there's not enough weeks in the year to read all of them separately, but also because on certain Jewish holidays, on certain biblical holidays, specifically Pesach and Sukkot, the Shabbat of that whole week, a regular parsha isn't read during those weeks. There are like special readings for those holidays. So now we have more weeks that don't get their own parshas. So we have to double up sometimes. So the um, I'm gonna the ones that are doubled up are Vayakal Pekude, Tazria Metzora, which was last week, Acharei Mot and Kedoshim, which is this week, Bahar Bechukotai. These are later in the book of Numbers. We haven't touched these yet. Chukat and Balak, Matot and Masai, and Nitzavim and Vayelech, which I think is in Devarim, in Deuteronomy. I don't know why we double some of them in some years and not in others. There might be additional reasons, but it appears that the ones that are married to each other in a non-leap year when we don't have that extra month is because they are thematically connected to one another. So I'm going to show you how that works. We didn't meet last week, but last week was a double portion of Tazria and Metzora. So Tazria and Metzora are often read together, and they're thematically connected because they have a focus on ritual impurity, purification, and the connection between the physical and spiritual state in Jewish law. So I'm just going to summarize some of those connections. I believe that we spoke about the concept of tuma, which is a kind of ritual impurity. It's such a bad translation, but it basically refers to the state where you are not receptive, you are not open, you are not like spiritual things can't enter you. Okay. So in Tazria, which is in Leviticus chapter 12, verse 1 to 1359, it addresses impurity that devolves on a person from childbirth, from skin diseases, particularly tsarat, which is often mistranslated as leprosy. And I think it was Brittany. I was talking to somebody else privately about this, but leprosy is like such a bad translation. And also bodily discharges. It outlines the conditions that make a person ritually impure that require either isolation or some other specific procedure, immersion in a mikvah, something like that. Andrew, do you want to say something? No. Okay. And then Mitzora, the portion that immediately follows that, which starts Leviticus chapter 14, verse 1 to 1533, continues. And what it does is it details the purification process for somebody who is afflicted with Tsarat, which is a spiritual disease. It has a physical manifestation, but it's a spiritual disease that appears first on the walls of it doesn't anymore, it doesn't exist anymore, but it appeared first on the walls of somebody's home, then on their clothing, and eventually on their skin. And so Mitzora talks about how you restore the individual to a state of ritual purity. Both parshiot highlight the role of the Kohen, the priest, in diagnosing this tsarat and overseeing the rituals of purification, which would include offerings, immersion in a mikvah, and some other things. And Tazria sets up this is how they're connected. Tazria sets up the conditions that mark a person as being in a state of tuma, and Metzora provides a path for that person to re-enter society. The I told you that Tzara'at is a spiritual disease that has a physical, um, like it appears as a physical thing, but it's an indication of a spiritual limitation. So, for example, Metzora, which is a person who has this problem, is linked to the Hebrew Motse Shem Ra, which is related to Lashon Hara. It's a form of evil speech. So that's one of the slander or arrogance. Those are the things that will get you this disease, this spiritual consequence of violating not just God's laws, but also the harmony in a community, and get you thrown out of the community until you learn your lesson and you repent. Um, so the progression from Tazria to Mitzora is a journey from affliction. Well, first there's the sin, the affliction, and redemption, and that parallels the process of both personal healing and communal healing, because when you are when you are speaking slander, it's not just a personal thing, you're disrupting harmonious communal relations. And so both Torah portions emphasize that there's a social impact of this status that requires being separated from the camp in order to protect the community. And the rituals for being reinstated are reinforce the idea of social cohesion as well as spiritual cohesion, meaning the relationship between the person and God, and the relationship between the person who is a Metzora and the neighbors. Okay. And the truth is that the entire book of Leviticus, the entire book of Vayikra, is sometimes referred to as the book of holiness. And so maintaining Israel's sanctity in many different ways, this is the sort of the theme that runs through this. So, as I said, just to summarize, that in essence, Tazria and Metzora, which were last week's parshiot, they're one unit. Tazria identifies what conditions disrupt or take away ritual purity, and Metzora offers the means to restore it. So together, they're in balance between judgment, meaning calling someone to task for what they did wrong, and also um, mercy, which is there, okay, you sinned, but there is a way back in. Um, and also the connection between the body and the soul, that the body reflects a spiritual, um, the body reflects a spiritual um, flaw that, yeah. Now, it would be interesting today to think of, and we tend not to think of illness or disease in that way today, because this supernatural disease doesn't exist anymore. But it's an interesting thought about what ways we are physically impacted by when we're off the mark spiritually. I don't have an answer for that. I'm just throwing it out there because I have so much to cover that I want to move on to Acharei Mot and Kedoshim, which are the parshiot for this week. So Acharei Mot you will find in the book of Leviticus, the book of Vayikra, chapter 16, verse 1 through 18, verse 30. And so you remember that in Parshat Shmini, we talked about the death of Nadav and Avihu. And so it's almost like Tazria Metzora comes in, and now we're going to go back, because Acharei Mot literally means after the death of. Okay. And it is a reference back to the death of Nadav and Avihu. And God is now warning against unauthorized entry into holy spaces. And by this he means the Mishkan at this point in time, the tabernacle in the desert. So only one person, in this case the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, can enter, and only once a year, and only on Yom Kippur is the entrance into holiness permitted. Um, and so there's a whole bunch of stuff in this. I'm going to attempt to make these partial, which can be kind of technical and a little bit, I'm just going to use the word boring. I'm going to attempt to make them much more relevant. Um, but I just want to give you sort of the overview. So another feature of Yom Kippur, of the Day of Atonement, is the casting of lots over two goats. Again, we don't do that anymore, but it determines which of the goats is offered to God and which should be dispatched into the desert to carry off the sins of Israel and to be killed there. Um, the Parsha of Acharei Mot warns against bringing animal or meal offerings anywhere but the Holy Temple. It forbids the consumption of blood, which is a fundamental law of kosher, and also details a lot of the laws about incest and other sexual relations that are forbidden by Torah. Okay, that's just a big overview. Kedoshim picks up right after that, Leviticus chapter 19, verse 1 to 20, verse 27. Kedoshim literally means holy ones. And it begins with the statement to the Israelite nation, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. And this is followed by dozens of specific divine commandments, mitzvot, that um, call upon the nation to sanctify themselves in ways that maintain their holiness and their connection to God. So it includes the prohibition against idolatry, the mitzvah of giving charity, the principle of equality before the law, Shabbat, sexual morality, honesty in business, having honor for your honoring your parents, and just the general sacredness of life. And also in Kedoshim, there's a very, very famous passage that you have almost certainly heard of because Rabbi Kiva called a cardinal principle of Torah, um, that is known in regular English as the golden rule. Love your fellow as yourself. Okay. So we find that also in Kedoshim. Now, before we go, so I tried to think, what am I going to share with you? First of all, a lot of these laws, um, the laws don't apply specifically to the non-Israelite nation. However, there's a lot of universal wisdom packed in here, and I want to unpack that for you. But before we do that, I want to introduce you to Elisheva, who you may not know who Elisheva is. Um, so when Nadav and Avihu die on the day of the inauguration of the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the desert, we read, this is in Vayikra, in Leviticus chapter 10, verse 3. This is from a few weeks ago, that Aaron was silent. Okay, this is the verse. It's I just said it, chapter 10, verse 3. Then Moshe said to Aaron, this is what the Lord spoke. This is after the sons have died, and he is speaking to his brother who just lost two of his four children. This is what the Lord spoke when he said, I will be sanctified through those near to me, and before all the people I will be glorified. And the text specifically says, and Aaron was silent. Okay, that was his response. His response, whether you call it Amuna, whether you call it shock, whatever, he didn't say a word. Okay. So I already told you that the name of this parsha, Acharei Mot, means after the death of, and God describes the Yom Kippur service and orders Aaron into the Holy of Holies. And he goes, but we don't have any indication about his feelings at the moment because there's no narrative about what he's going through. But one might wonder, what about his wife? Okay. The wife of the high priest is also the mother of these dead other priests, Nadav and Avihu, and her name is Elisheva. We have already met her actually in the book of Shemot, in the book of Exodus, chapter 6, verse 23, where she is introduced to us with these words. Aaron took to himself for a wife Elisheva, the daughter of Aminadav, the sister of Nachshon, and she bore him Nadav and Avihu, Eleazar and Itamar. Okay, so we right away see from this, we didn't speak about this when we were doing that parsha, but to be a woman named in the Torah is something of an uncommon honor. So just to give you an idea, in all of Tanakh, in all of Hebrew scripture, there are about 150 women whose personal names are mentioned. Okay. In contrast, there are about 3,000 individual men whose names appear in Tanakh. So that's about 20 times the number of named women, which is a strong reflection of the sort of male-centric framework of Tanakh for reasons we don't fully understand. So when a woman's name appears, it is an indication that she must be important, right? So who was Elisheva? So the Talmud suggests that she was one of the two midwives who stood up to Paro's genocidal decree. I have introduced them to you as Shifra and Pua and told you that they are most commonly associated with Yocheved and Miriam, that is the mother of Moshe and the sister of Moshe. But there is an opinion that one of them was actually Elisheva, that it was Yocheved and Elisheva, not Yocheved and Miriam. But anyway, Elisheva is related to many powerful men. So her husband, Aaron HaKohen, is the high priest, who is the brother of Moshe, which means that Moshe is her brother-in-law. Okay. And Aaron, of course, besides being the high priest, he is a spiritual leader among the Israelites in the time that they're in the desert. Her children, her four sons, Nadav, Avihu, Eleazar, and Itamar, they were all Kohanim. They were all priests. Nadav and Avihu are the ones that died offering this strange fire, which we read about in Vayikra 10, in Leviticus 10. Eleazar, one of the remaining sons, eventually becomes the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and he takes over for his father. And he fathers a guy named Pinchas. Okay, so which makes Elisheva the grandmother of Pinchas. Who is Pinchas? I think you call him Phineas. I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but he was the one who, through his zealotry, he stopped a plague. We're going to get to that when we get to the book of Numbers, the book of Bamidbar, and he later becomes a Kohen forever and ever. So far we have her husband, her brother-in-law, her four sons, her brother, Nachshon ben Aminadav, he's the prince of the tribe of Judah. And he's the one who is famous for when the slaves who escaped, we're going way back to the Exodus from Egypt, they are at the boundary of the Yam Suf of the Red Sea, and he's the one who jumps in and the water reaches up to his nose and then it splits. I don't know if you know that story, but that's Nachshon. Okay. Nachshon is also an ancestor of David HaMelech, of King David. So via her brother, she is also part of the Davidic dynasty. So in this one verse, she's linked to the high priesthood, the Davidic monarchy, and to this very special moment in the Exodus from Egypt. But we don't know a whole lot about her. She's quiet, but she is clearly part of the like the powerful families of the nation. The um the biblical spotlight, I mean the scriptural spotlight in Acharei Mot, in this first parsha, is clearly on Aaron and his remaining sons who performing the Yom Kippur ritual in the Mishkan. But if you look at rabbinic tradition, Elisheva is not totally invisible. Okay, so I'm going to explain to you um, how that's the case, what the rabbis speak about. There's a concept in the Torah called cities of refuge. They were special cities where if somebody accidentally killed a person, they could run to that city for protection. And they were protected from usually a close relative of the victim who might have wanted to exact revenge. They couldn't touch them as long as they were living in this city of refuge. There's this guy on social media called Mr. Beast or something. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he makes these challenges where he makes people stay in one place for like an insane amount of time, like 100 days or 100 hours or um, something like that. And then if they're able to stay like in this one ice constrained space, often it's a circle, sometimes it's a grocery store, sometimes it's a house. If he can stay there for without like interaction with other people for like 100 days, he gets $500,000. Have you heard of this? No? Anyway, um, so the cities of refuge were a place where the person who accidentally killed somebody else is protected as long as they never step foot outside of the city until whoever the Kohen Gadol is, whoever the high priest is, dies, and then that sort of resets the clock. Okay, so then they could go home and they don't have to worry anymore. They are safe from persecution. So the if in the book of Shemot, in the book of Exodus, chapter 21:13, this is where this idea of cities of refuge um, applies when God tells Moses to set up a couple of these cities. He says, but it was not by design. But if it was not by design and God caused it to happen, meaning the death was accidental, it wasn't a violent murder, I will set aside a place for you to which he may flee. Okay. So there's more about cities of refuge in Bamidbar chapter 35, the book of Numbers, the book of Deuteronomy chapter 4, Deuteronomy chapter 19. But regarding the cities of refuge, what the rabbis tell us is that the mothers of the priests, such as Elisheva, she's both the wife and the mother of the priests, would provide the people who were exiled in these cities of refuge food and clothing. Why? So that the individuals who are guilty of accidentally killing somebody and cannot be set free until the priest passes away, so they don't pray for the death of the priest. Okay. So these mothers, Elisheva among them, are on one level, they are the among the elite of Israelite society because they are the mothers, in some cases, the wives of the priests, but their well-being is tied up with the well-being of those who were exiled, who were guilty of, we'll call it involuntary manslaughter. Okay. So Elisheva is also, as much as she is elevated by her relationships with all of these powerful men, she is also um, obligated, in order that they not pray for the death of her husband and her sons, to to be nice to them and to bring them food and clothing in their exile. Then the Parsha closes with this long list of sexual partners that, if you read it, it's clear that it's written for men, for sexual partners forbidden to men, which continues this sort of male-centric nature of this text. So on the most obvious surface level, the women in this Parsha are there mainly as passive, either they are related to powerful men or they are passive objects, like don't have intimate relationships with this kind of woman, depending on her relationship. But the rabbinic tradition does take us a little bit deeper. And the Midrash tells us that Elisheva was profoundly affected by the death of her sons. The Midrash says Elisheva, the daughter of Aminadav, I don't know why I trip over that name, did not enjoy happiness in this world. True, she witnessed the 5 crowns, which are the 5 categories of men that she was, powerful men that she was related to, in one day. But when her sons entered to offer incense and were burned, her joy was changed to mourning. So that suggests that despite the fact that she had pride in the mourning of the inauguration of the Mishkan, in all of the prestigious roles that her extended family had, the loss of Nadav and Avihu on the very same day overshadowed all that and plunged her into deep mourning, from which it appears that she never recovered. Um, so um, I'm just um, okay. I sort of made that point. Um, okay. What's interesting about her story is that in a flash, all of her pride, joy, all of her whatever the positive emotion was of being connected to all of these powerful men on the day of the inauguration of the Mishkan, they were all destroyed, taken from her in a moment. Even if you follow the text, it says that Aaron was only temporarily, momentarily, whatever, he was removed from his role as the high priest. So she lost it all in that moment. And even though her son would go on to take over for his father, and you would think that would be a source of pride, the idea is that this day just kind of ruined her and she was never the same again. Okay. Now, um, let's talk about the themes of these two parshiot of Acharei Mot and Kedoshim, and then I want to finish with some life lessons that we can derive from these kind of dry and very specific laws that are present in these two parshiot. Okay, Acharei Mot and Kedoshim read together. What's the thematic connection? There's a shared focus on holiness, on moral and ritual purity, on the establishment of a covenantal relationship between God and the Israelite nation. And they both emphasize this idea that Israel is called upon to be a holy nation. So holiness is a central theme. In Acharei Mot, we have the Yom Kippur rituals, which are designed to elevate into holiness, because they are like the ultimate expression of atonement, of purification, maintaining the sanctity of the community, maintaining the sanctity of the tabernacle, emphasizing God's presence with the Israelite nation and the need for them to maintain purity. And then Kedoshim, the Parsha of Kedoshim, begins with the command, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." So it frames holiness as an active pursuit. How do we get to it? Through ethical living, through ritual commandments, yes, but it takes the concept of holiness, which a lot of us think like, oh, holiness, like that's out there somewhere, up there somewhere, and it expands the concept of holiness into everyday life. Okay. There's also the theme of ritual purity, moral purity. I have a lot to cover, so I'm gonna sort of skip through some of this. The covenantal relationship, how Israel connects with God after they sin, reinforcing the relationship with God after they have gone astray in some way, warnings against adopting the immoral practices of Egypt or Canaan. And Kedoshim deepens this by outlining this code of conduct that distinguishes Israel as having this special covenant with God, with laws that reflect divine attributes like justice and compassion, and ensure that the covenant is part of daily life. There is a piece in Kedoshim about separating from other nations. And here we're talking about evil nations, that Acharei Mot explicitly forbids the Israelites from adopting what it called depraved practices of the surrounding nations, particularly sexual practices and idol worship, to maintain Israel's distinct identity in relationship to God. And Kedoshim reinforces this distinction through the laws that set Israel apart, like fair weights and measures in business, respect for parents, giving charity. I mentioned some of this, which contrasts with the way other nations at that time were behaving. Um, okay, I really want to get to, I'm going to skip the rest of it and get to the life lessons in the Parsha, but I want to say something about what it's like when you live as a Jew, even today. This concept of holiness expresses itself in a lot of decisions, and I'm gonna give you two examples from my daily life. One is the way that I dress. Okay, so I think a lot of you also, for your own spiritual reasons, dress modestly. In Jewish law, there are very specific laws about what a Jewish woman is expected to wear and what she shouldn't be wearing. And so when I shop for clothes online or in a store, I will often like I will go through racks and say, well, you know, this neckline is too low, or these sleeves are too short, or the skirt is too short, or it's too tight, or you know, whatever. So and every time I get dressed, or every time, like if somebody gives me clothing or whatever, every time I'm choosing clothing, I am conscious of this, because it's not like a random law that's imposed upon me. It's something, it exists in Jewish law that I accept upon myself, but it impacts me every time, every day that I get dressed. Okay, that's one example. Covering my head is another example of something that reminds me of the obligation that I have to be holy. Every time, this doesn't happen so much in Israel, but in America, when I'm shopping for food or choosing a restaurant, I have to be careful to choose a restaurant that serves only kosher food. I have to be sure when I'm in a grocery store in America, it's not so much the case here because although there's different levels of kosher, but keeping kosher is a way um, of keeping this sense of connection to God, this sense of holiness for me as a Jew, because that's what God said he expects of me as a Jew. And so in daily life, in what I wear and how I cover my head and what I eat, in a million other decisions, every time we get money, whether it's a paycheck or whatever, anytime somebody gives us money, 10% of that automatically has to be recorded to be given for charity. Like there are daily practices that are just part of my life that remind me of this obligation to behave differently than other nations necessarily do. But let's talk about some of the life lessons in these parshiot so one of them I'm going to call atonement and personal responsibility. The Yom Kippur rituals, including the scapegoat ceremony, which doesn't happen anymore. And in fact, the whole Yom Kippur ritual that's described in the Torah doesn't happen anymore because we don't have a Mishkan, we don't have a tabernacle, and we don't have a temple. So what we do now is we just read about them. But what's at the core of these very specific rituals is the importance of acknowledging and taking responsibility for your mistakes. That true growth comes from self-reflection, comes from repentance, comes from seeking forgiveness. So the lesson here is to own up to your own actions, learn from your mistakes, and to continue to strive for personal improvement. So we're not choosing two goats and sending one of them off to the desert anymore. We're not even doing the carbonos, I'm blanking on the or offerings, the ritual offerings. We're not doing that anymore either. But all of the laws and so forth of Yom Kippur devolve into acknowledging to God when you've made a mistake and trying to get back into alignment. So that's a lesson that applies to everybody. Another lesson is respecting boundaries, interpersonal boundaries in particular. This Torah portion details forbidden relationships and behaviors and emphasizes the need for self-discipline, for respect for moral boundaries, social boundaries. There's a list of arayot, which are forbidden sexual relationships, that reminds us that holiness involves how we manage our personal temptations, our personal desires, how we protect the dignity of others. So the this lesson is that healthy relationships and healthy societies thrive on clear boundaries and having mutual respect. There's also the concept of holiness through intention. So when the Torah is describing the high priest rituals in great detail, the lesson for us is the need for careful preparation and intentionality when you are involved in something holy. So that extends to daily life where mindfulness can elevate actions. There was a rabbi, today people refer to him just as the Rav. His name was Yosef Ber Soloveitchik. He was a major American Orthodox rabbi. He was a Talmud scholar, a modern Jewish philosopher. He passed away in 1993. My husband actually was later, when he was older, he needed a student from the rabbinical seminary with him all the time, that he was never alone, and my husband was on that rotation. So I never met him, but my husband knew him and spent many, many hours with him. He famously said this: there is no sanctity without preparation. Okay. So the idea is not just to flop into something, um, a responsibility of life, but to approach life's responsibility with purpose and with focus so that you can create a meaningful outcome. Okay. Um, and the last lesson pulled out of Acharei Mot is the concept of community and collective responsibility. So the Yom Kippur service, as it's detailed there, atones for the entire community, which which shows that individual actions impact other people, impact the collective. So we have both unity and a shared accountability, and that helps strengthen the bonds of community. So the lesson here is that your choices affect others, and that we have the ability to contribute positively to our communities. No man is an island, right? That concept that um, is illustrated in Acharei Mot in a very specific way. But the lesson to us is, we're all interconnected. You probably have heard this concept. I might mess this up because I'm doing this off the top of my head, but like if a butterfly flaps its wings in Japan, it causes a like an earthquake in some other faraway country. I think it's called the butterfly effect. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Like the spiritual perspective is that we are really all connected. We are certainly all connected in the sense of we all came from Adam and Eve, right? There's no human being alive that does not trace his or her ancestry back to Adam and Eve. So we have common ancestors, but we also have like we all have like we're all under the service. I don't know how to say this. Like we all have the same God. Okay, there's some differences in different faith systems, but in general, what I believe is that there's one God that controls the entire world, and that we are all children of the same God. And so we're there's no such thing as um, being like an N of one. You cannot, as a human being, like the very nature, you're born into a web of interconnections. And as you mature, your interconnections just grow more and more complex. I was thinking about in Judaism, we have after someone passes away, we have a practice called Shiva, which is 7 days where people come and comfort the people that are in mourning. And you sit Shiva, it's called. You are a mourner for 7 categories of relationships: your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, your son, your daughter, and your spouse. Okay. So if any of those people in your circle pass away, you are commanded as a Jew to sit Shiva, and people come and visit you. And people come and visit from all the different tentacles that the deceased person had. It could be people from work, people they went to school with, people who were former neighbors, people who are second cousins. Like if you ever have the opportunity to go to a Shiva house and you just ask the person who's sitting Shiva, like, what was the most surprising visit? It's off, like people come out of the woodwork, and it reminds you that each of us is part of a web, uh, not in a bad way, but like interconnected with so many other people from all different angles of life. Okay, I think I hammered that to death. Okay. Kedoshim, a couple of life lessons that we pull out of Kedoshim. One is pursuing holiness. Remember, I told you that in the very beginning of this parsha, it says that there's a commandment to be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. That calls for all of us to strive towards ethical and spiritual excellence in every area of our life, to elevate our own character by aligning our actions with higher values like compassion, like justice, like integrity. I think that not you guys, because I know you're not like that, but I am under the impression that there are Christians who believe about Jews that all we do is just follow a bunch of laws, and that we are missing like a connection with God or a connection of a spiritual striving, and we're just sort of blindly following laws. That's what I'm led to believe. I'm not sure if that's true. But in fact, what I'm trying to do is take these two parshiot that are filled with a bunch of, legalistic kind of language, and pulling out for you how they are nothing more than scaffolding for this life lesson of the importance of pursuing holiness. I'll move on because I just have a couple more minutes. Loving your neighbor as yourself. This is the famous verse. You find it in Leviticus and Vayikra, chapter 19, verse 18, which underscores the concept of empathy and fairness in human relationships, treating other people with the same care that you would like to be with which you would like to be treated, fosters harmony, mutual respect, and emphasizes empathy. And so the lesson for us in this is the necessity to practice empathy and kindness in all of our interactions to build stronger connections. So there are some people who work in, I'm going to call it, for lack of a better word, the service sector. Okay. Maybe it's a bus driver, maybe it's a toll collector, maybe it's a waitress, whatever, that many people have a tendency not to even, like, they see them in the context of, I don't think toll collectors exist anymore, y'all. I don't, it's all doesn't even, but you know what I mean? Like the person who you used to give your quarter to when you were, um, so one of the things that this would say, love your neighbor as yourself, means recognize the humanity even of somebody who's bringing you your scrambled eggs and your coffee if you're in a breakfast place or something like that. Acknowledge that they are also human beings. They also have the divine spark in them. They also have a whole life and all of their webs, even though they only interact with you in this service capacity. I once read this book. This woman is a journalist, an investigative journalist, worked for a short time just for the purposes of doing research for this book. She worked as a chambermaid in what I assume is not like a high level hotel, like a Motel 6. For those of you that don't live in America, I'm sorry, I don't know how, like a sort of a, like a roadside place that you go, not a fancy place. And the rooms have a lot of turnover because most of the time a traveler will only be there for one night. And she worked there to write her book about what it is like to be on that level of society as a worker. And it was very fascinating. But the idea is that those people, as well as the person you report to at work or somebody with more prestige in the social ladder, that is also part of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. Okay. Integrity in business and justice, we also find the laws about honest weights. Um, Literally, it means, like, let's say you sell things by the pound or by the gram or what, well, gram, that sounds like drugs, but you sell things, by weight, that your weights need to be honest so that your customers are getting the full value of whatever they're paying you for. But that's what it literally means, but you can see that it extends to fair dealings in any kind of a setting where money is involved or a trade of two mutual things is involved. Um, Impartial justice implies the importance of fairness in economic and social interactions, laws about judging other people favorably, not gossiping, as a way of building a society that's built on trust. So the message to us is to always act in all situations with honesty and fairness, even when it's challenging, even when it's going to cost us money, to uphold trust, because that's how you build a healthy society. And these are what I would call some of um, the universal wisdom of Torah, the concept that, okay, these laws may not apply specifically to nations other than what today we call the Jewish nation, but the messages that are in them are universal, and they are ways to build and maintain healthy societies. I'll just finish with these two. Respect for diversity and vulnerability. That there's commands in Kedoshim to leave gleanings if you're a farmer, to leave gleanings for the poor. That should sound very familiar to you from the book of Ruth. To respect the elderly, to treat strangers kindly. These are laws that help highlight the obligation that we have to take care of people who are vulnerable in society and to include them. So the lesson is championing the dignity of all people, especially anybody who's marginalized, anybody who is different from mainstream. And the last thing I'll mention, and I over prepared for you guys, but the last thing that I'll mention is balancing justice and compassion. So the portion of Kedoshim balances strict laws that are like punishments for sins with calls for kindness, because a holy life integrates both. It's accountability and also mercy. So we are all called upon to temper justice with compassion, to create a balanced and humane approach to life, particularly when we are judging other people. Okay, that is our hour. Um, I, as always, if you have to go, I understand. If I'm just going to take a quick look at the comments that some of you made while I was talking my head off. Uh, Okay. Um, all right. Elizabeth asked, do I think it will return with the temple?
The Zerat.
No, I don't think so because tzarad is a sign of sin. When the
Okay.
temple comes, the world will be perfected, and there will be no yetzer hara, there will be no sin, so there will be no need for tzarad. Okay. Um, Anybody before we shut off the recording? Anybody have a question or a comment that you want to make? Um, again, my goal was to make two parshiot that are kind of technical and have a lot of ritual to make them relevant. And I hope that I achieved that with you. And anybody before I say goodbye? Margaret, unmute yourself because you're muted.
I love your connection that you made between, I never thought about dress as the way that, because it does, when you look at, I remember when I went to Israel for the first time and I saw the drastic difference between dress there and dress in the American culture. But I never really thought that it was a connection of just a reminder of who you're to stay under God's covering. I'm not just my representing myself here. I'm representing, the Lord. So as you went through that, I thought about that, how you connect. I love the way you connected that because I'll never look at it the same way again, because it definitely makes complete sense as to it's really not really about the person. It's more about who the person's representing.
Correct. And it's even more dramatic in the case of religious men, Jewish
Mhm.
religious men, because ritually speaking, so the laws for me as a woman, I'm supposed to keep my elbows covered, keep like don't show my cleavage, cover my knees. Um, but for men, they, in fact, if you like ask most people to just like picture in your mind, just close your eyes and picture in your mind a Jew, like probably 99.9% of people will picture an Orthodox Jewish man because they have a very distinctive way of dressing
Mm,
and um and they are clearly identifiable. It is not always obvious, I think, it unless you know how to read, especially if you see an Orthodox woman who is wearing, let's say she's wearing a jean skirt and a three-quarter length t-shirt and a wig. It wouldn't necessarily automatically, in some secular context, it wouldn't necessarily automatically scream Jew, but a man who like has his tzitzit out and he's wearing a kippah, um,
Mhm.
eh, like, and maybe he's wearing black pants and a white shirt, whatever he looks like, that is much more quickly identifiable. And it's something that we have to teach our children that that when you are out in the larger world and people identify you as a Jew, exactly what you said, you are representing holiness. You are representing God in the world. And you have to be mindful of that because
mm,
if you misbehave or you speak coarsely to someone or you cheat someone or
mm,
whatever, it just inflames, it's what we
mm,
call a chil Hashem. It makes God look bad in the world.
mm.
And that's something that we take very seriously. Anybody else? Thank you for
Sorry,
that
Rika,
comment.
can I just ask a question?
Sure.
Do you, with the head covering, do you wear it all the time or just when you go to the synagogue or how does that?
Okay, so I wear it all the time unless I'm home with just my husband,
Hmm.
then or alone at home. But anytime I'm out of the house, no, like I'm going to go to the grocery store, the post office, whatever, always, always. But um And then if we have people in the house that are not my husband or one of my daughters, but if my son-in-law came over, for sure I would have my hair covered all the time. But people have different standards. So some people say if it's your own house, you don't have to, no matter who's visiting. Um, and of course, there are women who they only put something on their head when they go to synagogue, or but that's not really, they're doing it for some other reason,
Mm.
or some variation of a reason, but yeah. Does that answer your question?
Okay, so it's out of respect for your husband.
N- I wouldn't say that. Although one of the things when I first became religious, one of the things that I was taught, and I'm going to tell you, but I really hate this explanation. I was taught that you're supposed to preserve your hair for your husband.
Mm-hmm.
And I hated that answer because I felt like at that time I was like just overwhelmed with how much of Judaism was like about men.
Yes.
And like here's another thing that we do for men. But the
Mm-hmm.
truth is, it is one of the affirmative ways that I express myself as a Torah Jewish woman. And
Mm-hmm.
if you know why, like there could be women that wear a hat just like a hat I might choose on any given day, or might wear a scarf for reasons other than Jewish law or their understanding of Jewish law. But I know when I cover my head when I am in out in public, even like even if I'm putting something outside my front door, so directly opposite my front door is our neighbor's door. We live in an apartment building, so there's a neighbor directly across. And I always like I'll sometimes if I have to put something outside my door because somebody's going to come pick it up, let's say, I'll go and get a hat just to open the door and put it in case they happen to be walking out
Okay.
at that time. So for me, I actually wrote a whole essay about this in a book called it was a book about hair covering and how I came to understand hair covering is something I do for me, not something I do for my husband.
That's
That was a
beautiful.
very powerful shift for me.
Mhm.
Thank
That's
you.
beautiful. Thank you, Rika.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and shut off the recording now and thank you for being with me. And I'll see you, God willing, next week. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.